Okay, good evening everybody. You're most welcome. Damien O'Dowd is my name. And this evening's lecture, public lecture, which is the final in our current series this year, is Stress, Friend or Foe. Education events such as this evening are part of what St John of God Hospital does to reduce stigma and to assist people with mental health problems and their families. We continually try to raise awareness by media engagement, lectures, social media and through research and publications, and also by offering evidence-based care to those who need it most. We also provide mental health first aid training across the country in clubs, colleges, businesses and community groups. We believe that talking about our mental health and sharing information is of benefit to everyone in society. So back to tonight's proceedings, and before I introduce our chair for this evening, I'd like to point out just some housekeeping matters. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please note that there are two exit doors from this hall, one to my right, to your left, and the door in which you came in. Both will lead to an exit from the building. I'd ask you to either turn off or just to place on silent your mobile phone, please. Tonight's event will be live streamed and will also be available afterwards on our website. The format for this evening's talk is that the talk will take about approximately 45 to 50 minutes. There'll then be a short interval, during which time that the question sheet on your chair will be collected by a member of staff and given to the panel for a question and answer session if you wish to ask a question. We plan to finish this evening by 9 p.m. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers and chairpersons for their time and input, and to thank everyone who's assisted in the preparation and organisation of the public lecture series. It's my pleasure to introduce our chair for this evening, Geraldine Corr. Geraldine is a dedicated Director of Nursing here at the hospital with a wealth of experience in mental health care. She qualified as a mental health nurse in 2004 and went on to earn a Master's in Mental Health in 2007, followed by a Master's in Management in 2021. Throughout her career, Geraldine has held various posts including staff nurse, clinical nurse specialist, nurse practice development manager before taking on her current role in 2019 as Director of Nursing. Her diverse background has equipped her with a comprehensive understanding of clinical practice and nursing leadership. In 2015, Geraldine briefly served with the Mental Health Commission as an inspector, where she assessed mental health services to ensure compliance with regulatory standards and best practices. This experience enhanced her commitment to quality care and service improvement. Geraldine is dedicated to advancing mental health nursing and is passionate about fostering an environment of excellence in patient care. She believes in the importance of continuous professional development and actively supports initiatives that promote the growth of nursing staff. She's also particularly passionate about stigma reduction in mental health. As a mental health first aid facilitator, she actively engages with community to promote awareness and understanding, aiming to break down barriers and support individuals affected by mental health issues. Her commitment to advancing mental health nursing and fostering community connections underscores her belief in the importance of holistic and compassionate care. Geraldine, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'd just like to echo Damien's sentiments, I suppose, and welcome you here this evening. The public lecture series is such an important part of what we do in terms of making sure that everybody has access to the information that they need to look after their own mental health. And part of what we need to do is actually empower people to have the right information to be able to, support themselves or support others that they love who are maybe experiencing mental health problems as well. I have the pleasure, I suppose, this evening of introducing to you Miss Denise McGinley, who's going to be your speaker for this evening. Denise, like myself, qualified in mental health nursing in 2004, so the same year together, though she didn't train here in Dublin like me. She began her career as a mental health nurse in the Letterkenny Institute, but after graduating, she came up here to St John of God Hospital, and she held a position here as staff nurse until 2013. During her time here, Denise has built strong foundations in mental health care, working directly with patients and honing her clinical skills. In 2013, Denise left us for a period of time to work with Jigsaw's early and brief intervention service in Donegal, where she set up outreach clinics to provide one-to-one mental health support to individuals aged between 14 and 25. In addition to direct support there, Denise worked to increase the mental health awareness by providing education to schools, to teachers and the general public. And her work at Jigsaw was focused on making mental health information accessible and equipping communities to recognise and address mental health challenges. Thankfully, she returned to St John of God Hospital in 2015, stepping into the role of clinical nurse manager. And in 2021, Denise was appointed as the clinical nurse manager of a pilot virtual day hospital here. This innovative development aimed to ensure continuity of mental health care during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Denise was at the centre of this, reflecting her adaptability and dedication to her field. Denise has a passion for early intervention and prevention of mental health problems, and this led her to successfully obtain the role of mental health promotion nurse here in St John of God Hospital in December of 2022. In this role, she focuses on promoting physical and mental health, with a particular emphasis on improving physical health outcomes for individuals with mental health challenges. She also provides health promotion talks to corporate audiences, focusing on stress management and identifying burnout in the workplace. She is a key member of the multidisciplinary healthcare team that works here in St John of God Hospital. Denise has also worked tirelessly to promote mental health anti-stigma campaigns within the organisation, providing staff wellbeing initiatives and one-to-one with patients to support their physical and mental health wellbeing. She is dynamic, knowledgeable and incredibly focused and passionate about her work, continuously striving to make a positive impact on both patients and staff. So without further delay, I'll hand over then to Denise.
Thank you, Damien, and thank you, Ger. And again, just to say welcome and thank you to everyone who's here in person tonight. And for those of you listening online as well, you're all very welcome to tonight's talk. So stress is something we all experience, and yet it remains a bit of a mystery. Is it an enemy that we can conquer, or could it be an ally that we can work with? And that's what we're here to explore tonight. So tonight we'll dive into what stress is and why we experience it in the first place. I'll explain the body's natural fight or flight response, the powerful mechanism that kicked in for centuries to help us to survive. We'll also look at how stress affects us on a biological level, including the hormones that drive it, like cortisol and adrenaline. And finally, we'll explore the ways we can turn stress into a manageable part of our lives, from building resilience to practicing self-care habits that protect both our physical and mental health. By the end of our discussion, I hope we'll all have a clearer picture of what stress, as not only a foe, but sometimes as a friend, can be. Something we can understand, manage, and even use to our advantage. So we're going to get started. But first and foremost, we're going to start with an intervention. And this is more for me than it is for the rest of you, because there's nothing more stressful than standing up here in front of a group of people. So we're actually going to do a little quick breathing exercise that I will explain in more detail later on. Okay, so if you all just want to make yourselves nice and comfortable in your seats. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to practice the physiological sigh. Okay, so the physiological sigh basically means that you take a deep breath in through your nose until you feel your lungs expanding. And when you just think you've enough air in, you take another quick breath in and then a slow exhale. So we're going to quickly do that. And within the first 5 minutes, you've already learned an intervention. So we'll just get started, okay? So if you follow me, deep breath in through your nose. And another quick one. And a slow breath out. Everybody feel their shoulders nicely relaxed now after that? Okay, so we'll get into it now with the definition of what stress is. So the World Health Organization defines stress as a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. The important thing to remember is stress is inevitable. It's going to happen to us all. It depends on what the stressful factor can be. It depends on how you're feeling in yourself. But stress is an inevitable part of life. We all experience stress, and it can be impacted by both internal and external factors. So when we talk about internal factors, we talk about our own belief systems, how we feel about ourselves, our own self-esteem, our own judgments about ourselves, and then external factors like finances, work, college for some people, relationships. But the most important thing is how we actually cope with stress. Some of us have good coping mechanisms, some have bad, and we're going to touch on that later on in some of the slides. And it might challenge you to challenge your thinking around some of the coping skills you might already have. For the purpose of tonight's talk, we're going to talk about stress under 3 different categories. So we're going to talk about acute stress, which is short-term, episodic, and chronic stress. So an acute stress response is basically what happens when, an example would be you're driving through traffic and the car in front of you suddenly jams on the brakes. What you experience in your body is an acute stress response. It's a chain of events that physiologically happen within your body. It's connected to your brain, where your brain sends a message to your body that there's a threat, and you react in a certain way. So your survival instinct kicks in, you jam on the brakes, and you avoid an accident. We react quicker than you can realise, like the messages that are sent within your body go at rapid speed. If you think of an athlete before they get ready to run a race, they can divert that stress that they have into the physiological power to actually give them the energy to complete the race and to get ready to do the race. So that's an acute stress response. Usually once the acute stress has finished, your stress levels return to normal. When the acute stress response happens, you might find that your heart is racing a little bit, your breathing has changed, your palms might be a bit sweaty. But once the traffic starts moving again, you feel calmer within yourself and you're able to continue your journey. Episodic stress can be work-related, so it might be that you have a couple of different deadlines to meet in a short period of time. It might be in relation to busy family life. It could be that you arrive home from work one evening and 2 of your kids have to be at 2 different events at 2 different times, and you're trying to manage that stress of how you're actually going to manage that. One of the things about episodic stress is that it can actually build resilience within you, because in hindsight you can look at that episode and see if there's something that you could have done differently and plan for future episodes that might happen so that they don't happen that frequently. Chronic stress, on the other hand, is when you feel within a constant state of stress or that heightened emotion that stress brings. You feel constantly on edge. It can lead to physical changes within your health. You might not be sleeping well. Your appetite might change. Your energy levels could change. And it can also have an impact on your mental health. It can lead to the development of anxiety or depression. Next, we're going to look at how stress makes us feel and why this happens. So like I said, there's a physical response that happens within your bodies, and this can affect how we feel and react in certain situations. When we feel under threat, our bodies respond in a certain way, and when we face a stressful situation, our bodies activate what's known as our fight or flight response. So any of you that would have seen our public lecture last year by my colleague Carol Keegan would have seen an extensive video and explanation of what the fight or flight response is in terms of anxiety. A similar response happens when we're faced with a stressful situation. This response is built like an internal alarm system within our body. When this happens, our brain sends a signal to our body that there is a potential threat or challenge in front of us. And we release certain hormones within our body. And for the purpose of this talk, we're going to talk about 2 hormones, one called adrenaline and one called cortisol. Adrenaline is naturally occurring in your body, but during that episode of fight or flight, it's what causes your heart to speed up. It's what causes your palms to get sweaty. It's what causes the changes in your breathing. At the same time, cortisol, which is also known as the stress hormone, helps to keep us alert and focused by releasing energy from our body's reserves. And in the next slide, we're going to look at the body and how that actually happens. This response can be incredibly helpful because it helps us to react quickly. So back to that acute stress incident where you're sitting in the car and somebody jams on the brakes in front of you. Your eyes send a message to your brain. There's centres in your brain that send messages to the systems in your body to release these hormones and to protect you. This response can be helpful in the short term. However, in the long term, when these cortisol levels are higher in your body, so when you're under a prolonged period of stress, it can lead to issues like high blood pressure, weakening your immune system, and can have an effect on your overall mental well-being. So understanding the fight or flight response and I suppose the chemical reaction that actually happens within your body is really important as a mechanism to manage your stress going forward. So in the next slide, we're going to get a little bit more technical, but not too technical. So here we have a picture of the human body. So the fight or flight response is our physical and emotional response to fear. So we have a system within our body called the sympathetic nervous system, which is a branch of the autonomic, or if you want to remember it easier, the automatic nervous system, because it basically kicks into action really quick. When we say sympathetic nervous system, you might think they want to change the name because some of the symptoms it can present with may not be the most sympathetic. The system works at lightning speed when we're under threat, and it's kind of like the accelerator in your car. It gives you the energy to go. The hormones released cause a chain of events in our bodies that are designed to help us survive. So you can see on the diagram here, your pupils dilate and you get tunnel vision. You become really focused on what you have to do. It says hearing loss, and it's more or less that your hearing becomes a little bit more diminished because your senses decide what's more important for me. I need to be able to see what's going on. I was saying earlier on, have you ever been in a car and you're driving and you think you smell burning? What's the first thing you do? You turn down the radio. And it's not that your ears can smell the burning, it's that you can actually give more focus to your sense of smell. So your breathing changes and it becomes faster. There's an acceleration in your heart rate. Your liver starts converting glycogen, fat, to glucose to actually give you energy. The adrenal gland on the top of your kidneys start to produce hormones. So that would be the adrenaline and the cortisol. Your digestion slows down and your bladder relaxes and blood rushes to your muscles to get you ready. So during that period of stress, you might feel your muscles getting tense. You might find that pain across your back between your two shoulders. You might feel that your legs are getting a bit heavy, and that's what's happening. It's a physiological response. Later, we will talk about another system that works within the body that we can actually activate ourselves. So this is an automatic system within your body that happens. But thankfully, we have another system that we can actually activate ourselves that can help reduce some of the symptoms that we feel while we're experiencing a period of stress. So the role of the hormones in stress. So like we said, cortisol is known as the stress hormone. Cortisol is naturally occurring in your body. Like I said, it's secreted from a little gland on the top of your kidneys, and its main function is to regulate your blood pressure, your blood sugar levels. It's really good at regulating your inflammatory response, and it also plays a part in your sleep-wake cycle. So when you wake up in the morning, be it by an alarm or somebody calling you, there's a little rush of cortisol there, and that's what wakes you up. During periods of stress, this hormone can be excreted in larger quantities. And this can help your fight or flight response. So what we were just chatting about, that the cortisol kicks in and it gives you the energy to take on that challenge is. With the main effect being that it turns fat to sugar to give us energy to escape the fight or flight that's ahead of us. Adrenaline is also naturally occurring in your body. So that's the second hormone we're going to talk about. And in higher quantities during fight or flight, it can cause physical symptoms. So like your increased heart rate, shallow breathing, sweaty palms, that pain we get in our tummies because our digestive system has slowed down, all caused by the hormone adrenaline. During fight or flight, however, and during periods of chronic stress, the brain has a difficulty sometimes distinguishing between what is a real threat and what is a perceived threat. So that's what you find sometimes during periods of chronic stress, that you're in this heightened state of fight or flight because your brain doesn't realise whether there is a real or a perceived threat. It's an automatic response. So now we are going to look at what can cause stress. So like I said earlier on, we're going to look at external factors and internal factors that can cause stress. So according to the American Psychological Association, some of the main factors that can impact on stress are finances. And I don't think that's a shock to anyone. I think the cost of living and inflation and everything at the minute is definitely causing stress on a lot of families in the country. Relationships as well, and that can be relationships within your family, it can be relationships within your marriage, or it could be workplace relationships or relationships with people in society. Your work can also be seen as a stressor, your current work or job workload. So if you feel that you've too many deadlines to meet in a short period of time, if you started a new job, or if you're someone that has just started a promotion, that you have your own belief that you want to be the best at this and maybe take on a little bit too much. Bereavement can also be a cause of stress, and bereavement doesn't necessarily mean death. A bereavement can be a loss. So it could be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of a partner. It could be, as a result of a chronic illness, a loss of the life that you once had after a diagnosis. Housing issues, which is also something that is quite topical at the minute. People trying to rent, trying to get mortgages, looking for that stable base for themselves or for their families can be incredibly difficult. Or moving house can be one of the most stressful things to do during your life. And then chronic illness, a diagnosis of a chronic illness can also be a huge stressful factor. Trying to look at how you're going to make appointments, how your life has changed, are you suddenly dependent on somebody else? These are all factors that can increase stress. So when we talk about stress, like we did earlier on, we said there's internal and external factors. So the external factors that we just looked at sometimes can be exacerbated by internal factors that we have ourselves. So when we talk about internal factors, we talk about our own belief system and self-evaluation. If you're somebody that tends to engage in negative self-talk about yourself, if you set yourself unrealistic expectations, your own mental health status. So I suppose how you're feeling at the time that that stressful event has happened. Where do you think you are on that mental health continuum at that time? Your sleep and rest, how you actually recharge yourself, and your overall well-being. So our beliefs about ourselves can be shaped by past experiences, past setbacks, or feelings as though we haven't achieved enough. Even with generally good self-esteem, periods of intense stress can lead us to develop negative thoughts about ourselves. So some things that we can do in order to combat some of these internal factors would be to practice positive self-talk. And when we talk about stress and anything that we talk about tonight, I always say the potential for having a stressful event is something that should be in the back of your mind 365 days of the year. So some of the practices should be daily practices for ourselves so that if a stressful event happens, it may just be acute and not turn into that chronic stress that people can experience. So to combat this, trying positive self-talk, setting realistic goals and having achievable expectations for yourself. So sometimes we can be handed a task that just looks completely overwhelming, but actually breaking down that task into more manageable and achievable goals will actually give you the momentum to keep going and reduce that sense of overwhelmment. Regularly checking in on your mental health and reflect on how you're feeling and address any concerns. And later on in the talk, we'll talk about how to do a mental health checklist on yourself. Remember, when you're not sleeping well, our brains become fatigued and it can be a lot harder to problem solve. It can be much harder to process what's going on around you. So sleep is really, really important. Taking care of your overall well-being is essential, as neglecting it can contribute to heightened stress levels. So now we're going to look at some of the signs and symptoms of stress, and not all of them are bad. So we've broken this down into 4 categories. So physical, what we feel in our bodies. So the physical, what we were chatting about in our 3rd slide there, the fight or flight. So that rapid heart rate, changes in our breathing, feeling hot and cold. In a way, you can look at that at a positive or a negative. If it's in the acute piece, reassuring yourself that this will pass. Once this stressor is gone, this will pass. On the other side, if stress becomes chronic, you could start experiencing things like headaches, upset tummy, changes in your appetite and in your sleep. Fight or flight as well gets us ready to actually achieve the task. It's to give us the energy to actually succeed. So reframing our thinking around that can be really helpful. Behaviours that might change during stressful periods. So if you're somebody that smokes, usually during stressful periods, people would tend to smoke more. And I suppose we're all aware of the physical effects that smoking can have on our physical health. Another piece to be mindful of is coping mechanisms that people can use in terms of maybe using alcohol. And if you regularly drink alcohol within the limits, but during a period of stress that you find yourself that you're drinking more, it's something to be more mindful of. You can become quite restless. There might be changes in your appetite. You might engage in avoidant behaviour. An avoidant behaviour to look out for is if you're generally a person that's quite sociable, that meets up with their friends or, goes for coffee or goes for a walk, but you find that you're stopping that to manage the stressful events. So if it's meeting a deadline at work or something, that's the avoidant behaviour to look out for, because you're actually avoiding your coping mechanisms, but you're still involved in the stress. Emotionally, we can find ourselves becoming irritable, agitated, short-tempered, notice the dips in our mood and a loss of interest. And our thinking can change as well. We can become quite self-critical, we can begin worrying, having anxious thoughts, becoming quite negative, indecisive and unfocused. So those are some of the key symptoms to look out for when stress is. So we're going to move on now to ways to manage stress. So top of the list is mindfulness. So I'm sure you're all familiar with hearing about mindfulness, but maybe not everyone's familiar with the concept of mindfulness. So I always describe our minds nowadays, like we live in a world there's constant stimulation. Everywhere you go, there's information, be it on your phone, be it on the radio in your car, be it on the TV. There's constant information and constant stimulus going on all the time. So I tend to describe our brains sometimes like the roundabout at the airport during rush hour. There is a lot of traffic coming in, maybe not a lot of traffic going out, and there's a bit of a bottleneck. So that's how our brains can be sometimes. Mindfulness is one of the most popular meditation techniques, and it has 2 main parts: attention and acceptance. The attention piece is about tuning your experiences to focus on what's happening in the present moment. It typically involves directing the awareness of your breath, your thoughts, and the physical sensations in your body to the feelings you are experiencing. The acceptance piece involves observing those thoughts, feelings, and sensations without judgment. So instead of responding or reacting to those thoughts or feelings, you just aim to let them go. You let them come in, you accept them, and you let them go. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is incredibly powerful in terms of managing stress. But mindfulness is a skill that has to be learned. It takes practice. And I would always say, maybe practice 15 minutes of a body scan to start off with, and try not to overwhelm yourself. You can find body scans on YouTube or Spotify, but to try something like that, just even for 15 minutes. The first time I ever did mindfulness, we were doing an hour-long body scan, and in my head I had gone to Tesco's and I had done my shopping and I had done everything by the end of the hour. But by the end of the 12 weeks, I was able to just go to Tesco's and do my shopping, and I wasn't getting the car serviced and everything else at the end of it. But it took a lot of practice. But it is an incredibly useful skill in terms of stress management. Physical activity as well. Oh, sorry. So physical activity, just going for a walk, getting out in the fresh air, helps to release endorphins, those happy hormones in your body. The other thing about physical activity is it helps reduce the cortisol levels in your body. And another positive to physical activity is that if you go for a really brisk walk and you find that you're starting to get short in the breath and that your pulse is racing a little bit, you're actually mimicking what fight or flight is within yourself. So it's the same symptoms. You get the shortness of breath, your blood pressure goes up a little bit, and your pulse races. And you can manage that yourself. You know, you'll slow down your breathing yourself and you'll kick the other system into action. And when you practice that, it will make stress easier to manage as well, because you can reframe it around, this has happened to me before, it happened when I went for a walk, and this is what I did, and this is what worked for me. So psychological interventions like cognitive behavioural therapy, incredibly useful in terms of stress management, especially if stress is caused by your own internal belief system and maybe negative thinking styles. Because cognitive behavioural therapy will help us understand how our thoughts and our feelings are linked to our behaviours. Your overall well-being, so I have there sleep, eat, exercise, repeat. So just even those three basics, trying to keep a really good sleep pattern, eating healthily, having your regular 3 meals a day, and trying to get the minimum of 30 minutes of exercise in per day. Breathing is something that is really underestimated when it comes to stress management, and in a later slide I'm going to explain that a bit further, but it's something we do every day, every minute we breathe. But the effectiveness in it in terms of managing stress levels is amazing. Avoiding caffeine, nicotine and alcohol, if you can. We'll explain in a later slide how this can actually increase some of the stressful physical feelings you may be experiencing. And then just naming it. Actually saying to somebody that you trust, do you know something? I'm actually feeling really stressed. I actually feel really overwhelmed. And the relief that a lot of people get from actually naming it and just saying it out loud can be enough for them to be able to engage in some of the other interventions that we can talk about. So in our next slide, we are going to talk about stress versus burnout. So there is a difference between stress and burnout. Burnout is usually caused by a prolonged and excessive period of stress. In the next 3 slides, we're going to look at, I suppose, 3 of the main differences between the 2 of them. But burnout is mainly characterised by feelings of hopelessness, cynicism, and a detachment from work and life. Unlike stress, you may feel overwhelmed, empty, and lacking in motivation. So factors that can influence burnout include, it could be work-related, which is what a lot of people associate burnout with. However, it can happen in relationships. It can happen in terms of finances. It can happen as a result of loneliness, parenting, or caring for a loved one. So what we're going to do now is look at the 3 main differences between it. So in terms of your energy levels, so during a period of stress, we describe our energy levels almost as a state of hyperactivity. So that fight or flight has kicked in and you have this energy to do what you need to do, like meet a deadline or run a race. Burnout, on the other hand, is where those energy levels have kind of peaked and you've literally burnt out. You have nothing left in reserve. So you have a lack of energy and you experience fatigue. Your emotional state. So when we talk about our emotions, we talk about, like in the earlier slide, for stress, you might feel anxiety, irritability. You might have a shorter fuse than what you would normally have. So somebody coming in and giving you 3 tasks to do may not bother you in general, but if you're in that period of stress, you might actually snap back at them. Burnout, on the other hand, you have a sense of detachment. So it's just as if those tasks just wash off you. You have a sense of apathy and hopelessness. And in terms of performance, stress can help increase focus and energy, whereas burnout can lead to reduced productivity, poor concentration, and a decline in work performance. And that can lead, we talk about work, but it could lead to a decline in your performance even at home, trying to run a household, or trying to mind your family, or trying to, if you're being a carer for somebody, trying to mind them. So is all stress bad? So now we're going to try and look and see, is friend really a friend, or stress really a friend or a foe? So not really. I suppose when you look at acute stress, for instance, short pockets of stress like acute stress can actually help us. So that fight or flight innate alarm system that is there within us is there, and it's designed to protect us. It's our survival mechanism. There's a similar response in terms to the stress response that helps develop immunity. So when you get a vaccination like your COVID or your flu vaccination, there's a similar stress response that happens within your body which helps to actually improve your immunity. It can help you to get tasks done. We tend to be more focused and have more energy. And good stress feels like excitement. So I saw a clip the other day which I thought was quite interesting, and it was someone talking about their observation of reporters asking athletes after the Olympics, were you nervous before your race? And the athlete said, no, I was excited. And the person that was observing this said, exactly, because the reporter would have been nervous going into that race, but the athlete had channeled that stress to work for them so that it felt like excitement within them and they were excited to do the race. It can help build resilience within us, and we're going to look at resilience building in the next couple of slides, but learning from a stressful experience and seeing what we could do differently. Helps us to meet deadlines and get tasks done. However, prolonged stress can lead to hypertension, so high blood pressure. And when it comes to heart disease and I suppose cardiac problems, stress coupled with poor lifestyle decisions that can be associated with stress are a perfect storm for impacting on your physical health. So like we said earlier, during stressful periods, some people tend to smoke more, they may tend to drink alcohol, and their appetite might change. So they may tend to eat maybe unhealthier foods. They may crave sugary foods. So that's a perfect storm. It can also impact on your mental health, leading to anxiety, depression, and a possible dependence on substances, if that is something that you use as a coping mechanism to manage your stress. There was a really interesting survey done in Harvard in 2012 where they got 50 med students, 25 men and 25 women. And they challenged the belief that all stress is bad for you. So what they did was they broke them into 2 groups of 25, and one group, they said to them, they gave them tasks to do that would induce a stress response, but they kept saying to them to reframe their thinking about it, that stress was actually beneficial and that it wasn't going to harm them and it wasn't going to make them sick. And the other group, they left them with their belief that stress was harmful. So what they did was they put them through a series of tasks and they checked their heart function during this. So during a period of stress, the vessels in your heart can become narrower, okay? But what they found in the group that they had kind of prepped and trained to reframe their thinking around stress was that their blood vessels didn't get narrower, they stayed the same. And they had the same physiological response as what you would have during courage or joy. So their theory behind that is that if you can reframe your thinking, even around your fight or flight, that this is actually helpful for me, it will reduce the physiological effects and lead to better outcomes. So next we're going to look at resilience. So resilience is being able to adapt to challenging situations, and it does not mean that challenging situations do not occur. So when it comes to stress, some of the ways to build resilience against stress are having strong connections, be that family, be it friends. Connections are really important because another hormone that is released within your body is a hormone called oxytocin. It's called the cuddle hormone, and it's also a stress hormone. But studies have shown that people who spend time with family or friends, and especially helping out family or friends, actually become more resilient to stress, and they're less likely to experience physical health problems associated with stress. Embracing change and focusing on what you can control and what you can't, and accepting what you cannot. Like we said earlier, setting realistic, smart goals for yourself. So trying to reduce your expectations or break a large expectation into more manageable ones. Self-care, minding yourself. We always use the analogy of when you're on a plane and they say to you, put on your own oxygen mask before you help somebody else. It's really important to mind your own self-care so that if a friend or a family member needs you, that you're in a position to be able to help them. Self-care is not selfish, and self-care can be anything from going for a walk, eating well, keeping appointments if you need to see your doctor. That's all part of self-care. So trying to maintain a positive outlook and seeing every situation as an opportunity to learn. Sometimes that can be easier said than done. But I always give the example of if you go for an interview and you don't get the job, the best thing you can do is get feedback and see what you need to work on for the next time, and asking for help. So SMART goals, when we talk about SMART goals, it's an acronym for a goal that is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time specific. So breaking a larger goal into smaller little SMART goals can help you achieve them. So simple ways to manage stress. So knowing your triggers and identifying the signs can also always be helpful. One way to do this is journaling. Gone are the days where we all wrote in diaries and we all kept diaries. Those days are gone. But it's actually really beneficial in terms of being able to look back and identify, where did things start to go a little bit wrong? Was it that my sleep was disturbed? Was there a lot happening at work? Was there a lot happening at home? And that way you can intervene earlier and stop yourself getting to that chronic stress stage. Day-to-day check-ins with yourself, making it a habit. How am I feeling today? Do I feel a bit stressed? How would I say my mood is? What does my day look like? Having a balanced nutritional diet can improve our overall well-being. Make time for yourself. Trying to say no if you feel that there's too much on your plate. Having the ability to say, do you know something? Can't do that right now. I'm going to leave it for a while. And connecting with others, as we previously said. So physical activity and diet. So like we said, exercise helps release the happy hormones, the endorphins in our bodies. Recommended 30 minutes of exercise per day can help in terms of reducing your stress levels, but it can also, from a physical point of view, reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and weight gain. And try as balanced a diet and nutritious as you can get to keep your energy levels stable during the day. Caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. So caffeine is a stimulant. It impacts on our sleep, our pulse rate. It's contained in energy drinks, it's in coffee, it's in chocolate. And caffeine can increase cortisol levels. So be mindful when drinking caffeine when you're stressed. And I'm going to explain that further in another slide. When it comes to alcohol, using the recommended amount of alcohol is really important. And as well as that, nicotine is also a stimulant. So if you're already feeling stressed and you feel your heart is racing and you think a cigarette's going to calm me down, the nicotine is actually going to increase that heart rate. So just be mindful of that as well. Sleep hygiene. So sleep is your powerhouse. If you're experiencing sleep disturbance, there's some practical tips in terms of managing your sleep that bit better. Trying to go to bed and get up at the same time every day. Reducing your screen time before you go to bed, so try to leave the mobile phone away from you. Having a bath before you go to bed, if you have a bath in your house. You can put some Epsom salts into your bath. There's magnesium in Epsom salts, and magnesium can help reduce your cortisol levels. Reduce your caffeine intake. Caffeine has a really long half-life, so if caffeine is something that you like, trying to stop maybe drinking full caffeine drinks around 3 or 4 o'clock in the day and maybe switching to decaf for the rest of the day. Try not to eat too late at night because it makes it harder for your body to digest your food. Keeping your bed area tidy. Easier said than done, sometimes, especially during heightened periods of stress, and sometimes if you're feeling stressed within yourself, your bed area or your workspace can reflect how you're feeling. So even moving, a few things aside and putting them in a basket and kind of out of sight, out of mind can help improve your sleep. Or listening to some relaxation music and practicing deep breathing techniques. So breathing techniques. So like I said earlier on, one of the main, I suppose, allies that we have in terms of managing stress is our breath. And it's something that we kind of take for granted. I'm sure all of you noticed when I started this talk this evening, there was plenty shallow breaths happening, but it has regulated after doing our physiological sigh. So evidence of breathing basically shows that earlier on we were talking about this sympathetic nervous system that we have within our body, okay? That kicks us into fight or flight. It's automatic. But we have another system within our body called the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you think of paramedic, it's coming to save you. That's what your parasympathetic nervous system is coming to do. It's coming to reduce the symptoms of stress. And one way to kick that into action is your breathing. There are numerous studies done on the evidence of practicing good breathing techniques to reduce stress levels. One exam in 2017 in the Journal of Frontiers of Psychology spoke about how practicing diaphragmatic breathing, so taking good deep breaths in where you feel your lungs completely expand, had noted that with participants engaging in this for in or up to 20 sessions, when they checked their cortisol levels in their saliva beforehand and checked afterwards, there was a huge reduction in their cortisol levels. So it doesn't cost us anything. It takes a bit of practice, but it's the biggest ally that we have, and it's available to us to help reduce our cortisol levels. So some examples of that would be box breathing. So box breathing is where you inhale through your nose and hold it for a count of, inhale through your nose for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, and hold for a count of 4. So you're kind of going 4, 4, 4, 4. The next is the physiological sigh. So that's what we practiced at the start of this talk. And basically the physiological sigh, I came across it. There's a guy called Andrew Huberman, who is a ophthalmologist and a he's not a neuropsychologist, I've lost the word, but he basically works in Stanford University in America. And he's quite active on social media and he has pages on YouTube. And he got a question one day about if you're in that acute stressful moment, what can you do in that moment to help reduce your stress levels? And he recommended the physiological sigh. And the way they kind of came across it was that we do it all of us anyway, and it's usually in our sleep. And what happens is sometimes when we're sleeping, our breathing changes and the carbon dioxide levels within our body increases. So we engage in this physiological sigh when we're asleep. And theory behind it is that the little sacs inside our lungs, which are responsible for getting rid of CO2 and bringing oxygen in, when you do the physiological sigh, you actually expand these much better. So you're actually bringing more oxygen in to your body. And it triggers your parasympathetic nervous system. He said the other example that you get of it is if you see a child that's crying, and they're crying and they're crying, and all of a sudden they go, and that's the physiological sigh. Progressive muscle relaxation. So like we said, during the fight or flight, our muscles can become quite tense. There's a lot of blood flow going to them. So progressive muscle relaxation is basically where you tense individually the muscles in your body and focus on your breathing at the same time in order to get your muscles to relax. And then yoga, with a huge emphasis on your breathing. So those are 4 techniques. The 2 you can do at home. The 3rd you can even do at home. You can look up videos where you can actually do it sitting in your chair in the evening. And join the yoga class, you have that connection as well as achieving a new skill. So top tips for managing stress. And you're looking at this and probably thinking it's fairly basic, but these are the basic kind of cornerstones really to maintaining good mental health. So meeting a friend, making an appointment to go and meet somebody and go for a walk. Self-care, like we said, reading a book, walking the dog, getting some fresh air, trying yoga or a new hobby, taking a break from whatever is stressing you, just actually getting up and taking a break and asking for help. So managing acute stress. So like we said, breathing techniques in the moment. So when you're in that acute stage and you can feel all those physical symptoms, just think, I need to get the parasympathetic nervous system going here. I need to get that into action. So practicing your breathing techniques. Then there's grounding techniques like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where there's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can taste, and 1 thing that you can touch. Thank you, Jer. Another thing that I recently seen, and I thought it was actually quite good, if you find that there's a lot of things stressing you out, make a list and cross out what you've no control over. And you'd be amazed how small your list might get. Because sometimes when we're in that period of heightened stress, it's hard to see the wood from the trees, and we might absorb other people's stress. So that's really good. If somebody comes in and hands you a job and you kind of go, oh God, I don't know if I can do this, and you can feel the fight or flight kicking in, get up and walk and get rid of that cortisol. Just reduce it there and then. Take a break and take a minute and stretch out your body. So just stretching out those muscles can be really beneficial. So checking in on your mental health. So I suppose we're just out of October, and October was Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And there's a lot of campaigns around knowing the signs and symptoms of breast cancer and knowing how to check your breasts. And we're all generally really good when it comes to our physical health. We'll go to our GP, we'll get our blood pressure done, we'll get our bloods done. If we've an ache or a pain, we'll go and get it seen. But how often do we actually check in with our own mental health? And usually when we see that there's something going wrong, in hindsight we'll go, do you know something? A couple of weeks ago there was something, but I didn't take any notice of it. So it's something we should all do, is check in with our mental health regularly. And in the next slide, there'll be a few tips there on how to actually do that. Prevention and early intervention is key. So practicing your self-care and practicing your coping skills and intervening early is key in managing stress. So like journaling, being able to identify the signs and symptoms of deterioration. So documenting your sleep, documenting your appetite, and any changes that you notice, so that you can look back and go, do you know something? It's 2 weeks and I still haven't slept well. Identify your coping skills and see, are they beneficial or are they not? And intervene early. So tips on how to check in with your mental health. So check in daily on your mental health and ask yourself questions like, how would I rate my mood today? Am I anxious, irritable? Is my mood a bit low? How have I been sleeping? Are you sleeping too much or too little? What are your energy levels like? Has your eating habits changed? Are you becoming less socially engaged? Have you stopped seeing friends? Have you stopped ringing family? What's your concentration like? Would you typically be able to read a book and you've noticed that you can't read a book? Or if you're like me, you sit and watch Netflix, do you find that you can't concentrate? Have you noticed any physical symptoms like headaches, muscle tension, or digestive changes? And what can you yourself identify that has changed? So when we look at coping skills, like, we're all individuals, we're all different. We're all going to experience stress in a different way. So when it comes to coping skills, it's not a case of one size fits all. What I might find helps reduce my stress levels may not reduce your stress levels, and vice versa. So sometimes we have to explore and see what works for us. You might need to use a combination of skills. It might not be as simple as going for a 30-minute walk every day. You might have to go for a 30-minute walk every day, and you might have to go to bed at 9:30. So it's about exploring and seeing what works for you. Make a self-care toolkit for yourself, so that if you do feel that stress is starting to kick in, what can I use? Do I need to do a bit of relaxation? Do I need to go and meet that friend? And be available for yourself. Make time for yourself and make time for others. So in the next slide, we're going to look at, I suppose, our capacity for stress ourselves. And a couple of weeks ago, for World Mental Health Day, the emphasis this year was on workplace mental health. And one of our psychology team did a talk with staff, and she used this really good picture that I thought, I'm going to have to use that in my stress talk, because it actually just gives a really good depiction of what stress is and how we can manage it ourselves. So it's called the stress bucket model. Okay, so when we look at stress, think of yourself carrying this bucket, all right? Carry this around with you all the time. And every time you get stuck in traffic, a bill comes in, your car breaks down, you get a phone call that you weren't expecting, you have to go somewhere you weren't expecting, you have an argument, the bucket starts to fill. So drip, drip, drip into the bucket. There's 2 ways of stopping the bucket from overflowing. One is that we have no stress at all. So I think it's important to be realistic that we can't have no stress at all. So it's unlikely that that's going to be an option. But the other option we have is gaining more control over our stress. So like I said, we're all individual, we're all different. So we all have different size buckets, and we all have different amounts of stress going into that bucket. But what matters is how you drain the bucket. So if you look, there's a tap on the side of the bucket, and what activates that tap is your coping mechanisms. So every time you introduce a coping mechanism that reduces your stress level, you're letting a bit of water out of the bucket. So you're making more capacity for stress within your bucket. It's important to look at your coping mechanisms. So for instance, if alcohol or substances is a coping mechanism that you have found to deal with stress, you may be letting some of the water out of the tap, but there may be twice as much going in at the top the next time. So I think it's a really good picture. I think it's just an easy way to look and see how we all can manage our stress. So let's recap on tonight. So I suppose what we've learned from tonight, hopefully, is that stress is inevitable and it's not always bad. And sometimes it's how we look at stress and how we reframe our thinking around stress that can be most beneficial. How we manage stress is important, so looking at our coping mechanisms, that everyone will experience stress. You're not alone. Every one of us has experienced it at some stage or another. That stress and burnout are different, and knowing your mental health can help you to intervene early. Talk to somebody you trust, and if you feel that stress is becoming too much, go to your GP, talk to a medical professional about it. Have a mental health toolkit that you can use. Monitor your sleep, your diet, and your energy levels. And above all, don't ever be afraid to ask for help. And that concludes our talk tonight on stress.
Okay. Hello everybody, welcome back. So we have collected the questions and we're going to do our best now to answer them for you. If there is a question you didn't want to put on a piece of paper or something you want to come and talk to us about after the talk, please feel free to do that. We'll be here for a couple of minutes afterwards, okay? So some of the questions I'm going to put together, I think there might be some specific information in them that might potentially identify people. So hopefully I can group them in a way that's a little bit more generic, but we'll answer your question anyway. Okay. So the first one, Denise, asks, how can you being overcome in a situation? So they find that a lot lately they are having difficulty when being asked to do tasks, or even when they're at home with a lot on their plate, and they're worried that they're heading for burnout, which they want to avoid.
Okay. So I suppose, like we said in the talk earlier on, kind of checking in with yourself and seeing where you are, and checking in to see what exactly is going on for you. Is it even looking at the basics like we talked about in terms of your mental health? Is it your sleep? Is it your appetite? Is it your energy levels? Have you noticed that you've become more isolated? And these are our protective factors if you think of it in terms of managing our stress. So if they've kind of reduced, sometimes our capacity to, I suppose, deal with stress tends to be reduced. So I check in with those. But if it's a case that you feel that you're heading for burnout, there's absolutely no harm in going to your GP or any other healthcare professional and having a chat with them about it, and just see if they can give you some practical advice around that. But I suppose what I would be looking at is keeping an eye on your sleep, your appetite, your energy levels, and talking to somebody about it. If it's a case that it's work related, that you feel that there's a lot of tasks being put in front of you, like I said in one of the slides, don't be afraid to say no. Maybe look and see, do you need to prioritise the tasks? Do they all need to be at once? Because when you're in that period of stress, like I said, it can be hard to see the wood from the trees, and all you can see is all this information coming in, but it's hard to disseminate between what's important and what isn't. So maybe sitting down and prioritising what tasks, and like I said as well, making that list and see what is bothering you and scribble out the ones that you actually have no control over as well. But if you feel that burnout is something that you're heading, there is absolutely no difficulty in going and having a chat with your GP about it as well.
The next question then is regular catastrophic thinking about a possible future scenario a sign of burnout?
So when it comes to burnout and when it comes to increased stress, it can affect our thinking styles. And like I said in one of the slides, we tend to develop these cynical, negative thinking styles about ourselves. So it looks like from that, the catastrophic thinking could be a symptom of some anxiety as well that can be associated with stress. And catastrophic thinking is a symptom of anxiety. There's really good resources online if it's something that you feel that you can follow in terms of challenging those negative thoughts and challenging those thinking styles. And they would be the cognitive behavioural therapy based resources that are available. And they're really practical guides in terms of challenging those thinking styles. But yes, anxiety and catastrophic thinking can be symptoms of increased stress.
And is allowing a time to worry for a set period of a day a useful strategy?
It can be. And it's something that I would have encouraged people to do if they have the ability to keep it to that specific period. So if you're able to kind of manage that time and set aside a period where that's basically that half an hour or maybe that hour that you're going to let yourself worry, and you can switch it off, that can be beneficial for people. I suppose the difficulty happens when that period gets longer and longer, and it actually starts taking over your day and impacting on your day-to-day life. But if it's something you feel that you can manage and that it's beneficial for you, yeah.
Does work overload always lead to burnout?
Not necessarily. So we're going back to the bucket. So depending on how you manage your stress and I suppose what coping mechanisms you have, I work with lots of people that have a huge capacity to manage huge workloads, and they just have better ways of managing their stress. So I think it's very individualized. So if I suppose you are looking, like we said about the bucket, and you're looking at your workload, and if you find that you're starting to experience symptoms of stress, maybe that's an indicator for you that you might be taking on a little bit too much.
One person asks about medication, Denise, and they're wondering if they're just best to stay on their medication in terms of helping them with stress. What would you advise?
My advice would be that if you're prescribed medication for any reason, that you shouldn't reduce it yourself without the guidance of a medical practitioner, because sometimes the side effects or the effects of that reduction can be quite detrimental to your physical or mental health. So it's important not to reduce any form of medication without guidance from a medical practitioner.
What is a panic attack and how do you manage it?
So a panic attack is an episode of intense fear. It's usually a symptom of an anxiety disorder, so it could be socially anxious. And basically, some people can experience just one panic attack in their lives, or they can end up experiencing panic attacks on a regular basis, and that can start impacting on their day-to-day functioning. So panic attacks would generally be associated with anxiety disorders. The physical symptoms would be a more intense version of the fight or flight that we were talking about. So some people feel this sense of that they actually feel like they're going to die. They have immense chest pain. They become incredibly short in the breath, and they have this intense fear that they may actually die. Last year we had a talk here on anxiety disorders. I mentioned it earlier, and it's available on YouTube. And Carrie Keegan, our other nurse specialist, gives a really good, clear indication of what panic attacks are, some of the treatments that are available for them, and the signs and symptoms of panic attacks as well. So that can be a helpful resource for anyone.
One final question then, Denise, is what can you do when you see the impact of stress on maybe people in your life, maybe people who you love, but they won't listen to you or won't engage with you? How can you manage that?
I suppose I always think there's a time and a place, and I suppose sometimes the less formal an environment, the better, and try to make it as informal as you can. Like even saying to that person that you were here tonight and that you were at a talk about stress, and I learned, these are some of the signs and symptoms, and I've kind of noticed recently that you might be experiencing some of them, and kind of planting that seed. You might not necessarily get the reaction that you want initially. They might meet it with a bit of defiance, or they might say, no, that's not me, but you planted that seed. So I suppose just acknowledging that you can see that they're struggling at times can be enough, and give them a little bit of time to process that, and they can come back then and seek support.
And in terms of if it's impacting upon the person?
So if it's impacting on you yourself, we'll go back to one of the earlier slides around, I suppose, how external factors sometimes can impact on our stress levels, and having a look at what we can and can't control. So what we can control in that situation is our own stress levels, and try not to mimic maybe the stress levels of the other person. So trying to keep yourself as mentally healthy and your stress levels as low as they can be during that period.
Okay, thank you very much, Denise.
Thank you.